Cache-maniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Welcome all of you geocachers. We're glad you're joining us for this, the episode 140 of the GeoGearHeads. Wow, that was a bad sentence. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm Daryl W4 with the Bad Cop and returning guest to Bear to talk about geocaching without a data connection. Something geocachers should always know about. But let's kick off the show with a drawing for the coin from Caching Audio Project.
Hey, the Caching Audio folks are capturing stories from geocaching or geocachers and posting them on their Cacher Audio Facebook page for you to hear. The Cacher Audio folks are so very generous to provide a couple of their very special geocoins, and we're giving the first one away this very night. We asked for the original name of Groundspeak. So, DeBear, what was that early name, and to whom will be getting that coin?
You know, I didn't know this history either, so it was fun to learn something new. The answer is Grounded Incorporated, and the lucky winner is Kitty Catch. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Kitty Catch, and make sure to email us your mailing address at geogearheads@cachemaniacs.com. But Grounded Inc., you'd think that would be something already taken? I'm thinking maybe by a truancy officer, for hire company.
I like that idea.
But we'll get into the actual meat of our conversation about offline caching. But we're thrilled that Cache at Night is a sponsor once again for this week's episode. Head over to cacheatnight.com or follow the link or the banner in our show notes for a variety of geocaching supplies and toys. Of course, they have all the supplies for night caching, like the lights, reflectors, UV markers, lasers, and way too much more for us to mention here. They also have things like a Cryptex cache container, the Cache Me If You Can board game, and trackables. So lots of fun stuff. There's even stuff for your caching puppies. I've enjoyed poking through their selection many times and spent a pretty penny there myself. So check out their site from the link on our website, or just browse over to cacheatnight.com to see for yourself. And thanks again to Cache at Night for sponsoring this edition of the GeoGearHeads.
And thank you, all of you, the GeoGearHeads, for supporting companies who support the GeoGearhead shows. So tonight, we've asked DeBear to join us since he's been caching with his Nexus 7 tablet without a data connection. While you may not want to go that far, caching without data is something that all cachers should keep in mind. It could happen to you one day, and then what are you going to do? You're going to go back, you're going to listen to this episode and go, that's what I should do. So it might be as simple as carrying a GPSR with all the caches preloaded. Even for those with smartphones, caching just around the corner, some of the offline tips we'll share will help you to improve performance, lower your data usage, and safeguard against losing a connection when you drift out of range of towers or even Wi-Fi. DeBear, you've written a few posts about this on your blog, so let's start with a little plug about your blog.
Ooh, I like plugs. Well, you can find my blog, which is called Only Googlebot Reads This Blog. And the address is debeare, DEBAERE, .blogspot.com.
That is the best blog ever. The name of the blog. Best blog name ever.
Well, hey, isn't one of the best things about Wi-Fi, I'm going to call it Wi-Fi for the rest of the show, Wi-Fi and wireless, that you don't actually need the plugs, though?
This is true.
I thought we were talking about hair plugs.
For men?
Yes.
Well, yeah, that I don't think the Wi-Fi is going to help you with. Okay, I'm tired of Wi-Fi already.
Good. That didn't take long.
Kind of an inside joke anyway. But in any case, the big thing that we're going to be talking about is not relying on that dependency of a data connection, which of course the GPS users know how to do for the most part anyway, but we're going to kind of refer back to that a little bit. But for those of us using the smartphones and the tablets, it's always a good idea to make sure that you have at least some part of that downloaded. If nothing else, it can help you with performance, as we kind of mentioned before. But if you do happen to wander outside of range, then you get to continue without being impeded. The downside, of course, of offline caching is you're not getting that live connection. So if someone archived the cache after you've loaded that stuff in, as all GPS users have probably experienced at one point or another, they'll discover that they go for this cache and it's no longer there, and only come home to find that it's archived.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
actually, you never know really when you're going to run out of connection either. I was caching in Spartanburg on Monday, and there was about a 2 square block radius right by the postal office. So I'm not sure if they had like a cell phone blocker, but around those blocks, I could not get a signal to save my life. But if I walked a block away, I got full bars, 4G coverage. But right by there, and there was a cache there that I was going for in a park across the street, and I could not get cell phone signal. So you never know when the signal is going to disappear on you, and you'll be out of luck.
The signals were all headed into the time vortex.
Maybe.
But yeah, I've had situations where, for whatever reason, the data service just doesn't work. Even if it is connected, it just stops passing data. So that's never a good thing when you're out in the middle of nowhere. So you do want to have these contingency plans, and like we kind of mentioned early on, even if you're not going to go offline ever, just doing some of the basic stuff we're going to talk about in a little while will help you improve the performance. So you'll find those caches quicker. It just pops right up. You don't have to worry about any of that load time, even if you do have a good connection, and you're not going to burn as much data. So if you have a small plan like a gig or 2 gigs, downloading all that stuff over and over again, even the cache information and those images, does take a lot of bandwidth, and it's not too hard to go over.
Exactly. And perhaps you could put these tips into practice and lower your monthly data plan and save some money. Or save that data and watch YouTube videos later.
Yeah, now I will say that you shouldn't be using as much data as watching 15 minutes of YouTube in your caching. If you do, you're doing something
wrong.
A little bit weird. And
Say it, Daryl. You're doing something wrong.
Well, I won't say wrong, because I have actually run into some people who have used that kind of data, but they're driving across country and doing the live maps because they don't know which route they're taking.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those situations. They have no idea where they're going until they have to get there, and this is usually for the traveling service teams and stuff that I've run into who do this kind of stuff. So they're doing the live maps because they don't have the time to sit down and plot it all out. And things like the caches along a route tool on geocaching.com don't work very well from a smartphone.
Not at all. You can get it to work in a pinch, but it's frustrating.
Yeah. Now, let's start off with loading those caches, because that is the first thing that you can do to really improve the performance, regardless of whether you're actually going to be caching offline or just trying to boost your performance. And this is something I always do. That doesn't mean that I don't get into an area and say, ooh, I wonder if there's caches here, and pop it open and try to find some. But it is that getting the caches into the app without doing it live in the field. Do it over the Wi-Fi. It doesn't cost you your data, and it's going to be a lot faster. Plus, all the data is there beforehand. Now, the easiest way is certainly pocket queries through geocaching.com, and we're talking mostly about geocaching.com today, not necessarily about other services. But the geocaching.com will generate the GPX files. So if you have an app that handles the GPX files, or if you have a GPSR, you can always download that and import that, with the exception of the official geocaching app, which only allows you to download those directly from the Pocket Query list and save those into a list on the phone.
Yeah, I would also recommend that when you download those Pocket Queries, a lot of apps will allow you just to suck in the Pocket Query directly into the app, as you mentioned. But if you keep the Pocket Query on the phone as a separate file, you can reload the data into the app from the phone should your app go squirrely for some reason while you're in the field. I've had databases get corrupted in the field, both my standalone GPS and my smartphone apps. So if you keep the raw data on your phone or your tablet or whatever you happen to be using, then you have a way to reload those apps and get back up and running quickly.
Yeah, that is a good idea. Not that I've had too many problems with the apps, but I have definitely had issues with the GPSRs going bonkers on me, and having to wipe it and reload all the caches because something got corrupted and it wouldn't even turn on.
Yeah, I also load the GPX files on every device that I carry in the field. Typically, if it's a day trip, I might just have my GPSR and my smartphone. If it's a bit more of an extensive trip, I might also have my tablet and my, if it's like a multi-day trip, I'll have my laptop. But every device that I bring in the field, I make sure that I have the GPX files on every single one of them. So if any one of them goes wrong, then I have backup copies of other things. So I should hopefully never be in a situation where like my cell phone dies and I won't be able to have the data somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing, when you're importing the GPX files, depending on which apps you're using, most of the apps will give you the option to download the images as well. Now, if you're using a GPSR, some GPSRs actually do support images, and there are apps, and it depends on which GPSR you're using, but there are some apps that will help you download those and put those into the GPSR as well. So getting the images for like puzzle caches is really, really critical. I definitely suggest doing that, especially if it's one of those solve on site puzzles. I'm going to be doing one, it's a letterbox that requires this key. So I've got that key downloaded into its own separate file on the phone, plus it's cached in the app so that I make sure it's there, because this is going to be in an area where I know I'm probably not going to have very good reception. So I want to make sure I have all of those images available at every time I'm going to need it, and I don't have to rely on a cell phone signal to bring it up. Now, the official app and some of the others will also give you the option to, as you're downloading that Pocket Query file, to download the map tiles as well. So that will give you some of the offline mapping functionality. Some of the other ones I've heard will do that by default. I haven't had experience doing that myself.
I'm pretty sure CacheSense and CGeo, one of those two, I can't remember. I was playing with it today, but I can't remember which one because it's flipped back and forth. But I know one of those, when I imported the GPX file, the first thing it did was started to import all the maps for those caches as well.
All right, excellent. Hopefully we can get some feedback from some of our other users, some people who are using those on a regular basis, as to which ones do automatically cache the maps, and if maybe it's a toggle button, which is also another good idea too that we should mention. If you have limited space on your device and you can go without caching those images or without caching the maps, you probably don't want to do that, because the GPX file, the Pocket Query data, just the base data on the caches, doesn't take a whole lot of room when you compare it to images. So if you're low on space and you don't need the images, if you're just going to work off of like the compass, don't bother putting the maps or the images on, because that's how you can get all those caches on without sacrificing something else, like offloading maybe your navigation app or backup app, whatever else you need that you might have on the device.
Priceless pictures of your family. But yeah, but these apps that download the maps and download the pictures from it also give you a way to manage that. So you can go back and tell it, remove those after I'm done, so that you can bring in your next Pocket query with those maps. So make sure you manage what you're downloading, what you're importing.
Yeah, and we're speaking generally about this stuff because at this point we're kind of talking on these general terms. We can't give you specifics about any one app until we start getting really detailed about that one app. So these are more generalizations. How you get into it and handle it in most is going to be a little different. Now we actually have a question from Doug in the live Q&A that is very interesting. He asked, do most smartphones have a separate GPS in them that does not use cell towers? And the answer is yes. Most cell phones have a GPS in them, and it does not require cell phone towers. That has been the case since I think 2010. Maybe someone else has the information real handy here.
You're thinking of assisted GPS, Daryl?
Well, assisted GPS is GPS using the cell to back it up. But it's since I think it was 2010, there was a law in the U.S. that said all cell phone devices needed to have a GPS to give an accurate location when they call 911. And because of that law, and I think it was Japan, it might have been somewhere in the EU, had a similar law. Pretty much every cell phone at this point includes the GPS, and believe it or not, most of the chipsets for GPS or for cell phones now actually do include the GPS. Now that also gets into things like, does it support GLONASS and the new Galileo system? At this point, none of them that I know of support Galileo, but GLONASS support actually was available in cell phones before they were available in handheld consumer outdoor GPSRs.
Okay, there is in Android phones, there is part of the location setup where it will often prompt you to turn on GPS and Wi-Fi for location. Androids will use the geolocated Wi-Fi hotspots as kind of a quicker way to kind of determine where it is in the world. If you see that, and that will not affect the GPS. It may affect how quickly you might get your location on your cell phone, but it might not be quite as quick. But if you turn off the Wi-Fi location stuff, that will not affect your ability to go caching. Just in case somebody sees that, you might get confused.
To a point, because what will actually happen on both Android and iOS, and I think there is some differentiation here in the specific manufacturers in their builds of Android, but the Wi-Fi will help to stabilize the GPS signal as well. So if you're in downtown areas, leaving the Wi-Fi on can help it to reduce the errors. So like Chicago was really bad. The GPS was like probably at least a quarter mile or more off. The cell phones, when we turned on Wi-Fi, was only a block or two off. If we had the Wi-Fi off, then it was just as bad as the GPS. Not quite as bad, but close to. So it helps to stabilize it, and it can be an asset. If you're in an area that you don't get a good reception, not because of the tree cover, though that would probably help too. I know that for like subways and stuff, and inside great halls, people are using the Wi-Fi to get better location fixes than just the GPS. So you usually want to turn off the Wi-Fi to conserve battery when you're out caching. But if you're in one of those areas where Wi-Fi is bountiful, it can help to stabilize your location.
All right, cool. Just as an aside, I've just imported GPX file into both CacheSense and CGO, and CacheSense did not download maps, but CGO did. which is handy because CGO does not handle offline maps by itself. Having those maps in CGO is a benefit. CacheSense actually has the ability to download the map separately, so you can still get maps in there, but it doesn't seem to do it on import, at least not with the default settings.
Excellent. Okay, so we do have a little bit of info there. So let's talk a little bit about those offline maps and why you want to do that before we get into it. And essentially, the offline maps is just preloading the maps for whatever given area, so that when you do lose connection, you'll still have those tiles. And that's the way most maps are going to work, is they're individual tiles that are imaged, pre-rendered for your phone to actually grab. Same thing's true of the GPSs. It just works a little bit differently. So when we're talking about the offline maps, sometimes it can be as easy as just going into the app, it caches it for you, and you're done. Other times, it's a little bit more involved. And Dave, you were just telling us that CGO does cache those automatically. We know that the geocaching.com app does do some of the caching automatically when it's turned on. And a little tip, I tried to do some offline caching with the official geocaching.com app this last weekend, downloaded my Pocket Query, did the whole thing, got out, have no SIM card or anything in the Nexus 4, and boom, nothing was working right. So make sure to get out there, make sure that you've got the right stuff downloaded before you actually get out there. Turn off your Wi-Fi, turn off the put it into airplane mode. It turns off everything, and make sure that you can actually get in and see the correct caches and everything, and that it has actually downloaded that data. Now the downside is when you turn it into airplane mode, you'll also lose the GPS, and some of the apps will not launch if it doesn't have a GPS.
Are you sure about that?
What, the GPS?
No, being in airplane mode and GPS not working.
Yeah. It does on iOS, and it did on my Nexus 4 with 4.2. I haven't tried it since 4.2.
Okay, well, I'll try it now. I have KitKat.
Okay. Yeah, my understanding was that was a regulation in some countries that the GPS be disabled in airplane mode. I think that might even have been FAA was regulating that. So I know at one point I could do that in earlier versions of iOS, but as of at least iOS 6, airplane mode did disable the GPS.
I'm in my basement, so I'm not sure if it's working, but I'm not getting any signals whatsoever.
I'm in my basement, so my GPS is disabled.
Well, my Garmin will actually get signal down here, but
really?
Cell phones, yeah, very bad signal, but enough to at least know that it's talking to satellites.
All right.
Satellites.
So we've dealt a little bit with the caching ones, and that's where it gets easy, because it's just pretty much go in, make sure you're downloading the maps for your area. Usually it's just by importing the cache and downloading that cache data and saving it offline, and it's taking care of that. But some of the apps actually do require you to go through a little bit of extra work to get them in. Before we get into some of that, though, Locus Pro is one of your favorite caching apps, Dave, and I've heard that from a number of other people, because it is really at its core not a caching app, but it is an offline mapping system for people who need to have that kind of stability offline.
Yeah, that's right. It's much more than just a geocaching app. So they've spent a lot of time getting the maps, the way the map system works, really, really well. One thing I love about Locus Pro is that it supports several different types of maps. It has a lot of the tile-based maps, which are the type of maps you get from Google Maps or OpenStreetMaps or MapQuest. It also supports vector maps, which allows you. It's a much smaller data set, because instead of having to draw everything out ahead of time, it draws it out as you need it. So I actually, on my phone, because if you download, say, the tile maps for North Carolina on any resolution that would make sense when you're looking at it, you're going to use up gigabytes of data. but the vector maps for it is like 100 meg. So I keep the vector maps on Locust Pro on my phone and my tablet for pretty much any state that I'm likely to go to on any sort of rough spur of the moment thing, and it only takes up 500 meg. And then when I'm going out to a specific area and I'm going to cache there, I'll download the tile maps because that way you get satellite views and stuff like that for that specific area. But that way I always have the maps, at least the road maps of where I'm going at any point in time.
That's a really good tip. I would do the same thing. So
yeah, the other thing Locust
nice.
allows you to do is when you download maps, you can download separate sections. So you can download North Carolina maps and save it in a separate file, and download, maybe your higher detailed maps of your home range and keep those in a separate file. So you can toggle between them and even copy the data off and back on. So it allows you a lot more flexibility in which maps are displayed. So I'll often download the satellite views and the regular. Sometimes the terrain, if the terrain view is there, because terrain's always useful. But that's the thing I love about Locust Pro is it gives you all that flexibility. And when you download the maps, like Cache Sense, when you download the maps, you kind of like center your map on what area you want to download, and you say download, and it'll save all the tiles for that map. With Locust, you can specify the area you want, and you can draw an arbitrary shaped area and just grab the maps that you need. So if you're trying to download a larger area, you can cut off the corners that you're not going to be at and just get the actual maps where you know you're going to be, which can save you a lot of time downloading, because tile maps can take a while to download. So you need to leave yourself some time to make sure the download's complete.
All right, I did, kind of jumping back here for a second, I did power up my Nexus 4 on KitKat, and I do actually have GPS working in airplane mode.
Funky.
Yeah. So it probably depends, again, on what version of the software you have. And
could be the hardware as
Daryl's
well.
not in his basement.
Yeah.
Okay, we do have a comment here from Wet Coaster that we'll jump to real quick while we're in the middle of a tangent. As further backup, I'll try to write down the cache GC code and the lat long in Evernote, so I have the data even if I'm in a cell-dead zone outside of the cities and in the mountains. Can be bad up here in the frozen north.
Yeah, I understand the mountains completely, because I live near the Appalachian Mountains and the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's the same thing where you'll go around a corner and you'll go from full bars to nothing. So that's one reason why I've gotten used to whenever I leave the house, I assume I'm not going to have data connection, because you never know when you're not going to have data connection around here. Like even just going from here to work, my barber happens to be halfway through, and out in the parking lot I can get full bars. Go into the actual shop, goes away. So you never know when you're going to lose it. But printing them off is interesting. The one nice thing about GPX files, if you're a little bit technical savvy, is that the GPX files are just a formatted text file. So if you really find yourself stuck out in the place and your apps aren't working, you can probably load it up in some sort of text editor on your phone and just kind of manually search for things. It'd be kind of annoying, but it might save you from being able to find the cache or not.
Yeah, a simple text editor, you should be able to search for the keyword you remember in your head,
right,
and get some information to move from there. So you're exactly right. It's just a text file.
Meanwhile, Native Texan says that we should subtitle the show "Caching in Your Basement."
You'll never know what you'll find caching in your basement.
It's a treasure hunt.
Indeed.
My. All right, so let's get back on topic a little bit here. We'll talk briefly about looking for Cache Pro, which unfortunately, Bad Cop, you haven't had much luck with using that app.
I was just saying before the show started, that was one that never clicked with me. I couldn't get it to work right, and perhaps it was a terminology problem on my part, which I'm willing to take full credit for that, or fault, or however you want to look at that. It was just something that never clicked with me, and I'm not sure if perhaps I had a corrupted version for one reason or another. I could not get it to work.
Well, it is probably worth taking a look at again. There is a free version of the app that you can actually download and give it a try, and that's what you had used. And then there's the paid version and this is an iOS app, but it is an iPad app, and it was one of the early iPad apps that actually did the full navigation. That was a halfway decent app. Like Geosphere, which is our favorite, doesn't do iPad. You can use it on an iPad, but it's an iPad screen just blown up.
iPhone screen blown up, double-sized, yep.
Yeah. So this one is universal. It works on iPhone, it works on iPad, and it does seem to throw a lot of the cachers I've talked with for a little bit of a loop. But the Pro version does support offline maps, and that's one of the reasons why I got it and decided to use it a little bit, because I was taking my iPad out for some testing offline to see how it worked, and downloading OpenStreetMaps using something on the desktop. And this is one of the downsides of this, is you do need something on the desktop. It's a Java app on the desktop that goes and downloads the sources, compiles them, and builds them into stuff that you can load into these apps. But MOBAC, and I'm probably not pronouncing it the way that they want it pronounced, because it stands for Mobile Atlas Creator. But this MOBAC, it's just a converter, and a lot of apps will actually support this format. So you can go and find things like the topo maps and download them into your apps, like looking for Cache Pro. I think it was Neon Geo that was also doing the same format in the same way. So this is just like we're used to downloading maps for the GPSRs if we are doing that and not buying them preloaded. You have to build that file, transfer it to the device, and then you get your offline maps on the device, which, again, this is something that you might want to think about doing even if you plan on always having that data connection, because you don't have to wait for those tiles to load. And in some cases, you can get things like those topo maps or trail maps that are not available from the data sources like the Google Maps or the Apple Maps or whatever other Bing Maps that they might be using.
It's a really good point, Daryl. That way you can load those custom maps. If here in the Northwest we have lots of areas with trails, and the trails don't show up on any maps. So if you have a trail map, it's really nice. It can save you a lot of hiking around thinking, okay, does the trail bend up there, or do I have to go back half a mile and take that cutoff?
Well, I was going to ask if you've checked OpenStreetMaps recently, because the last couple of years, those trail systems have been showing up more and more on OpenStreetMaps, and I'm very impressed with the coverage, and it's just really kind of blown my mind at how much trail system has really been added to those maps.
OpenStreetMaps is not something I go to often enough. I'm going to have to go back and check that.
Yeah, I admittedly don't go back and check it as much as I should, but I've actually used OpenStreetMaps, and you know what? I think, Dave, you might have pointed me to the resources that you use to load your GPS with the OpenStreetMaps, but when I got my eTrex 30, I went and did the pre-done maps from, I want to say it was GPS Depot, but I could be wrong on that, where it's simply a matter of pick your state and download your state to the GPS. It's just drag and drop, basically, and you're done.
Yeah, speaking of trail maps, I want to put a shout out. I forget the cacher's name, but in Ontario, there is a cacher that has put a lot of work into collecting trail maps. The website is trailmaps.torontogeocaching.com, and there's a lot of trails in Ontario, but when I was up there last time, every trail I went on had a GPS or had a map of the trail system there, and they put a lot of work into getting those maps overlays. One benefit of building your own maps as well is oftentimes...
Hang on a second, Dave, before we go too far. I think you're talking about Northern Penguin? Does
Could
that
very well be.
of the Ontario Trails Project, and we actually have an interview with him back on episode 60. So if you want more on that project, check out episode 60, which we'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I was going to say one of the other reasons to build your own maps, if you have the ability to, is I noticed that when you download a satellite map and you download a road map and then you download a terrain map, they all end up in different maps oftentimes in the apps because they're different sets of tiles. But if you can build your own, then you can have the topo map overlay the trail maps and overlay road maps, so you get one view from the one map instead of having to juggle back and forth between multiple maps, which can be a benefit if you have that option.
Yeah, and it should probably also be noted that the transparencies aren't necessarily a given, especially with things like the satellites. If you're trying to download those, they're not going to overlay on top of something else. So most of the apps that do support the offline caching and your GPS as well will allow you to turn on and off the individual map layers. If it's loaded as individual layers, I should say that too.
Another thing I think we skipped over, although I can't remember, but I'll mention it anyways again, is that oftentimes these apps on the smartphone will use Google Maps by default. Mm-hmm. And through, I guess it's terms of service, Google Maps are not cacheable on the phone. So typically, when you want to download apps, I had this issue with Cache Sense where it defaulted to Google Maps. But if I wanted to actually save the map onto my device, I had to switch over to using MapQuest Maps or OpenStreetMaps, and it didn't even give me the option to save it until I switched over. So if you're looking in your app and you're saying I can't find where the menu option is to save the maps, make sure that the map you're using is not a Google Map. It's using MapQuest or OpenStreetMaps, and your options may show up there.
Excellent point, and that is something we did miss and should have talked a little bit about when we were in the caching of the maps, is the type of map that you're doing does usually dictate whether it can be downloaded or not. And the Google Maps app does allow for caching. We're not talking about the in-app maps, but we're talking about the actual Google Maps app. However, I can't remember, is it only 14 days that it will save that cached data, or is it more like 30 or 40 days? Does anyone remember?
I can't remember. It's also kind of kludgy, I recall, to kind of actually get it to download.
It is very kludgy, but if you are going to be doing driving and know that you're going to go somewhere, that is an option for getting the navigation in there. And that's something else I did want to talk a little bit about before we go on this episode, is it's always a good idea if you're using something like your smartphone to have the maps loaded on the device. Do not use the I'm talking navigation now, vehicle navigation, things like using the Google Maps, the Apple Maps, the Navigons, the TomTom Go, is that the name of it? I can't remember now. But there's a ton of these navigation apps out there, and the problem is that most of those just download the map data as you need it. A lot of them will actually send the route information up to a server and then send back the routing and the appropriate tiles so that it's cached. But yeah, I really prefer to have something like Navigon where you're doing it offline, or TomTom where it's completely offline, because those, that if you get into a situation where you don't have data service, like driving through parts of Canada where roaming costs you a fortune, so you turn it off, you're going to have the maps and you can make adjustments for detours and things without having major issues.
Yeah, it's actually one reason why I keep my Nuvie around in my car, is because it's completely offline and it works and it's routable and it's not dependent on any cell phone data at all.
Yeah, as long as you keep the maps up to date. And this is a problem with all of these offline maps, is you're not going to get the updates once it's been loaded into the device. You have to go back and somehow update those maps.
Yeah, and some of the, I know Locus Pro has the ability to, when you You can select a map area and download it again, and it has an option to say only refresh tiles that are older than 90 days, which can save you some time. But that's one of the downsides of setting up yourself for offline caching is the staleness of the data. So I often will. It's kind of a last minute thing. Usually I'll plan trips days, weeks, months in advance, depending on how complex and how long the trip is. But it'll be those last minute loading of the GPX files that happen, so the data is as fresh as possible. By loading, I mean like actually generating them the night before, not just keep them on the hard drive and loading them onto the device.
Yeah, and most of the apps that support the Live API do have an option to go out and refresh the data for the caches in the database.
Right.
But the trick is, if you're doing something like a pocket query, and that's what it was built on, it's only going to refresh the data for those. If there's a new cache that was published, it's not going to pick those up. So it is best to generally go and do the pocket query updates. Now, the catch is, if you don't remove the old data before you import the new data, you do risk having caches still appearing that are archived, unless you're going to go as well and do the update to make sure that all those caches get their current status. Well, I think we've kind of overwhelmed folks with a bunch of general information at this point. But before we take off, I seem to remember, Bad Cop, that you had played with using an iPod in totally offline mode for caching as a support device.
I have, and I've also used an iPad in the same way. Using an iPod, I was amazed by how accurate this thing really was, considering there is no GPS in it.
Yeah, that's of course just using the Wi-Fi to get a rough fix. So you probably aren't going to find that work so much in like a national park.
No, not at all. You have to use it in an urban area, and it's not going to get you to ground zero, accurately. But I was amazed that it would even, recognize where I was and start me moving in that direction. So, there are options for those who don't have a device with a GPS in urban environments to still be able to cache with that device.
Well, and that brings up a really excellent point, is not all of the tablets are going to have the GPS. In fact, many tablets do not. The iPad only has it if you have the wireless data. So if you have the Wi-Fi only version, you do not have GPS data at all coming from it. It's only using the Wi-Fi data. Now, I have been told, I haven't given it a shot, if you tether a iPad to your iPhone, then the iPhone's GPS data is transferred to the iPad. That was quite a long time ago.
That.
Yeah, give it a shot. I have the iPad with the LTE, so I've never tried turning off. If I remember, you can't. Yeah, you can't turn off the GPS, so you have to have the iPad without the GPS to test that functionality.
Right. Not too long ago, my son and I were out doing Ingress. He on the iPad, I on the iPhone, and on the iPod, and I'm on the iPhone, and it wasn't great. He would take a few steps and jump 40 feet. So it kind of made him like a superhero, but that's not really what was happening. So it was frustrating, but 40 feet when you're geocaching isn't that far off.
No, and you're usually looking at stuff on the maps to help with getting a location, especially when you're on the smartphones. So you can certainly use that to find the caches, but it's even a great way to supplement an older GPS or to get a better screen and keyboard if you just are looking for that as a supplement to a GPS. So you use the GPS to still get to ground zero, but you load everything into some old inexpensive smartphone or iPhone or iPad, whatever. you don't necessarily need the data connection to use it offline. And that's also a nice thing. Most cell phones or smartphones will actually operate without a carrier. So if you want to pick up one of those used cheap, it gives you a good secondary device, something to pass on to the kids. If you already have it and it's not worth trading in on another phone, well, there you go. It's something to hand down to the kids. Let them tinker with it on Wi-Fi only.
Exactly. It keeps your costs down if you have to pay for that extra data.
Well, and the other catch that we should note, in the U.S., and I believe the same is true in most other countries, but it's a different service, you do have to support emergency data if it has a voice radio. So the kids could pick up the phone and dial 911 on you, which will generate some annoying charges, if not, uncomfortable moments when the police show up at your house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dave, that sounds like that's a voice of experience you're saying.
No, I've never actually had the accidental call to 911, but I actually have used 911 in the field to call for help when I got my car stuck, and it was I didn't have cell service where I was, and the only thing I could call was 911, and luckily, I had GPS or coordinates. I could send them, and they sent a tow truck out. But 911 is fantastic, and it's awesome.
You had no cell service, but you could still dial 911.
I don't really know. It just said no service, so I think I wasn't allowed to roam on the network.
Okay.
But it was just enough to.
Your native carrier was not supported in that location.
Right.
See, and I thought you were going to call 911 when you couldn't find that puzzle cache.
Does that work?
Well, no, you call 911 once you found the cache and have them airlift you back out to your car.
You save on gas that way.
Yeah, exactly. It was a long hike, and I'm tired.
That is, we shouldn't laugh at it, because that is one of the problems that they've had since things like the Spot Messenger and the InReach have come out, is the number of... the number of not cachers, but hikers who get out to wherever they wanted to go and then decide, this is just too much work, I can't make it back. It's the people who haven't planned appropriately. You certainly understand if conditions have developed and such that you can't get back, but if it's something where you just can't walk back because you're too tired, you probably shouldn't have done that hike in the first place, and they're getting a little annoyed because these personal tracking emergency beacon devices have enabled people to do that more comfortably and rung up some pretty nasty recovery bills.
Yes, they have.
So they don't work as a transporter? We can just kind of call Scotty to beam me up?
Not yet.
Nope.
Give him some time.
Okay.
Yes, we are still hoping for that in the... iPhone 8, I think, is when that's predicted. So we'll keep hoping. Yes, that was a joke if anyone didn't catch that. In any case...
iPhone 8.
Talking about the police, though, I actually do have a police cache published in this area, so I will have to give that a shot this weekend.
Yes, I saw your post on that.
Like a cache published by the police?
Yes, by the police department.
Okay.
I think it's actually on the grounds at the police station. So we were talking about that just last week on the Randomized show. Now I have one that I'm going to be able to try myself.
Excellent.
Well, I think that's going to wrap up this edition of the GeoGearHeads, talking about caching offline. Dave, is there anything that you wanted to add before we get going? Maybe at least give us another plug for your website.
All right. Well, before I do that, one other point to make is if you are going out with equipment and you're planning on using like your cell phone or your tablet to back up to be able to restore your GPSR in case it goes bad, don't forget the USB cable because you're going to have to connect the two devices. Important tip. So my plug for my blog, it's called Only Googlebot Reads Its Blog, and it's at debear.blogspot.com.
Excellent. And on that same point of bring the cable, if you're going on a trip more than a couple of days, bring a couple of cables. Don't bring just one. it's always nice to have at least one extra spare because you never know when you're accidentally going to leave it behind or, drive over it or, get it stuck in the toilet maybe.
Ooh. There again, I hear the voice of experience talking, Daryl.
No.
Okay.
Just one of those comments that came up in one of the other podcasts about dropping your phone in the toilet and it's good for 30 minutes in the toilet.
Just don't flush.
Why would you know it's good for 30 minutes? I don't want to go there. I do not want to go there. Okay.
IPX standards.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what the IPX standards are for, according to this other podcast, is can you drop it in the toilet or not?
There you go. Especially if you ever want to use that phone again.
No, you don't. Trust us on this. You never want to use the phone again. So, let's go through the schedule for the upcoming shows. And September 11th, we're back with our next show. It's called Our Essential Tools, and we're very excited to have Pete of the Amazons and the geocaching vlogger to talk with us on that show. Please, please, please send us what your most important caching tool is, and we'll tell you how to do that in a little bit here, because we want to get a feel for what you guys can't live without. September 18th, we're back for episode 142, Evernote 2, and Scott Burks will be joining us for that one. Travelers 2, Dave, you're coming back in only a couple of weeks. Well, I guess it's more like 3 weeks. September 25th for Travelers 2. Then GSAC 1, we're actually going to get figures in. Many of you know him from his blog posts and previous appearances on this show. October 9th is episode 145, and that's going to be our next randomized show. And this time, we're back with the geocaching doc.
I'm trying to keep up with the numbers on those. The 1s and the 2s were easy. We're at randomized 28. That was hard to flash up that many fingers quickly. Okay. Now, we have something a little different for next week's question. So get an email ready addressed to GeoGearHeads@CacheManiacs.com with question 121 as the subject. DeBear, you can go ahead and do this right now.
I'm already
expecting to hear the keyboard clack. Okay, good. Now, in that email, send us your geocaching.com screen name and then tell us what, with the exception of your GPSR or smartphone, is your essential caching tool. One lucky submission to GeoGearHeads@CacheManiacs.com by 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. That's 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. On September 10th, will be drawn as the winner of the prize pack from coinsandpins.com.
Before we go, here's a quick reminder for the patrons. We're holding the September Patron Hangout at noon Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific on September 20th. Patrons should already have received information through Patreon and through Google+. If you're a patron and did not receive both, please email us at geogearheads@cachemaniacs.com, and we'll try to get things sorted out. And thank you again to all of you for supporting the GeoGearHeads.
Definitely. Now, I'm going to try to be awake for that one. No, I won't have a problem being awake for that one. Check the Cachemaniacs website at cachemaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by calling 206-350-3647, by emailing geogearheads@cachemaniacs.com, or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cachemaniac shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron or making a PayPal donation through the link on our website to support the Cachemaniac shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. This show is copyright 2014 by Daryl Wattenberg, all rights reserved.